Welcome, everybody. My name is Geoff Koshin West. We're here at ITB Sunday School. It is, good Lord, what day is it? It's May 31st. The world has got all kinds of wild stuff going on in it, and we are here for ITB Sunday School to talk about a pretty important and timely message. That is, how do we mourn? How do we grieve? What are those things? And how do we participate in that practice? And how do we carry the dead? So what we're going to focus on today is getting into that kind of question of what are these things? Why should I pay attention to it? What's the point? How is it valuable to me? And how to proceed with it. So today, as you have noticed, I am joined by Sarah Cat Daniel, who is a steward with ITB. She's been around for quite some time with ITB and working with me. And so we're it is a focal point for Sarah to, as far as grief and mourning is concerned, and these other different ceremonies, it's definitely something that she's interested in, that we're all interested in ITB, and it's something that she's kind of joining us today for a wonderful conversation. So I think I covered all the basics there about what we're up to this morning. So please hop in along the way if anybody has any comments, any kind of questions, and we'll kind of go from there. But Sarah and I have talked before, and she has kind of like this really cool anecdote that I wanted her to start the conversation with. So I'll just turn it over to you, Sarah.
I always have cool anecdotes. Gemini here, very great conversationalist. I wanted to, let me start with, so I was on an ITB conference call a few weeks back, and I boasted to my ITB team members and family how good I was at being sad, that in my self-discovery, I found that I would almost categorize it as an aptitude, that I don't, it doesn't scare me to get sad and watch sad movies and touch those feelings. As a matter of fact, I have a special place in my heart for that kind of space. And I believe the universe heard my boast, because then a few days later, I was laying in my bed in the morning and I heard my door open, and I rolled over and looked, and the door was cracked about a good this much space, which really creeped me out. And I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna deal with this. So I just rolled back over and went back to sleep. And then an hour later, when I woke up, I sat up, looked at the door, totally shut, had not been opened. So I doubted a bit for a minute, but then I asked, my space, what's happening here? And I definitely sensed the energy of my grandma Mary. My grandma Mary is my mom's mom, and I knew her, as well as my grandpa Ernest as my grandparents that I knew. So as the day went on, and I let what wanted to come up, gave space for it to come up, I had a memory of when my grandma died when I was 19. I was in college, and it was like September. It was my first semester, and my grandma Mary had passed away. She'd been sick with Alzheimer's for quite a while, and I'd witnessed her decline. So when she passed, it wasn't a surprise. And when I talked to my mom about attending the funeral, it was decided that because I had spent so much time with her, that I did not need to go to the funeral. So I didn't. But after I hung up that phone call, I went for a walk, and I was, of course, very sad. My grandma just died. And another student had passed by me, and she was like, hey, hey, Sarah Cat. And I was like, hey, and head down and just kept walking. And then a little while later, another student, not the same student, another cute little busybody, came in and said, you didn't, Susan said hi to you earlier, and you didn't say anything to her. And I was like, yeah, I know, man. Like, I just found out my grandma died. And she was like, oh, well, that's no excuse. She's like, that's no excuse. And I am a codependent in recovery, so I felt immediately responsible and unconsciously shut down my mourning. This is about 20 years ago. So back to just this last month, as that memory hit me, I started to hear within my own psyche, like, well, do you miss your grandma? Like, how do you, and I started touching that space of young, of anywhere from like 6 to 13 to 18, of how her hugs felt, and it just started penetrating more and more and more. And then within me there was the question, you know, would you like to feel your grandma's touch again? And it was scary to even say yes, because I knew the next thing that was going to happen was I was going to burst into tears, which I did, because I said, yes, I would love to feel my grandma again. And all that sadness, all that mourning came out 20 years later.
Yeah.
And I spent a good part of the day then feeling all those feelings I had stopped when I was 19. And as I reflected back on it, what I found to be interesting was when I was 13, my grandfather died. And I was around, and I witnessed my mother mourn him. I was from a huge Catholic family, and we had mass, and we had a funeral, and I saw a casket, and everybody was sad. And in that time, I could see how it was processed. And the point is, I never felt that kind of haunting from my grandfather's death. My grandpa, Ernest, didn't linger in my psyche as unfinished business, so to speak. But my grandma, Mary, now has always been one to me, within me, that has kind of lingered. And I drew the conclusion that I feel like a big part of that was that I did not complete that relationship. I didn't complete that story by mourning her loss and giving myself space to feel the sadness of her absence, and how I would never feel her touch again, and I would never have, you know, those, at least not here in this plane of existence. So it was, not only was it educational, mostly it was educational in the value of ceremony and ritual when it does come to death. But I will say, I've always, for me, the amount of sadness that that I will feel about something directly correlates to the depth of love. I always think when I get very, very hurt, very, very sad, it is because of the depth of how much I love these people in my life. So the sadness, while there's pain there, there's also an amazing joy to me, because I think, what an amazing thing that I can love this deeply, that I can hurt this much when we are separated. And I will say, for ITB, from day one, we've been trained to go into the pain. You know, the pain was not, I've tried to avoid pain for so many years. And it was upon participating in ITB, where ITB was like, hey, you know, this thing that you've been avoiding, trying to avoid for 30 years, it's actually your liberation. It's actually where you need to go to resolve the hauntings, to resolve the lingerings, to resolve a story that it was stuck in an unresolved way. So I'm always grateful for ITB and that training of going into the pain to find the treasures there. So yeah, at this point, I'm working with ITB, and I'm thinking of setting up like a grief group where we get together, out of towners in South Atlanta, in my home, to just create space for that sadness and for that mourning, and very specifically to not fix it, to not explain it away, to please, dear God, stop apologizing for the pain and your tears. And that's all we're gonna do, is we're just gonna have some space to be sad, and no one's gonna try to fix that would be, that's part of the process. Fix it is not a good word, but it is part of the process. But the zipping through the embodiment and holding space for that love, sadness, pain, is, I think, an obstacle often to the full resolution of how we feel and death and mourning and processing our loss. You have to actually process it.
100%.
Process it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the thing that, I mean, that's one of the primary reasons. You're touching on one of the primary reasons why we even bring up in ITB and in Sunday school this conversation of like, what is grief? What is mourning? How do we carry the dead? What do these things mean? Is because oftentimes, with the best of intentions, most folks are just not really interested in allowing. When we talked the other day, we used the word wallowing, or you used the word wallowing. We really don't give ourselves permission to just kind of wallow in this great heartache of whatever loss we're experiencing. And in ITB, you know, we talked about uncovering, claiming, and emergence. You know, a common theme in our culture is move on, is let it go, is, you know, treated as like, you know, we have multiple sayings for these things of, you know, let it be like water off a duck's back or something along those lines, shake it off, walk it off. And a lot of these kind of euphemisms of our culture completely disrupt the actual integration process. There's no hope for integration if the only information people give you, or your culture gives you, is to shake it off, to move on, to get back to work, you know, to let it go, so to speak. And this is some of the most dangerous type of, in our perspective, it's some of the most dangerous type of suggestion that you can make, because it does create this experience of, as you touched on, you have the right, if you had great love for whatever you are grieving, in this case, a person. In the most conventional way, people mostly just think of grief as loss of another human being that they loved or care about. But if we've lost a person and we have a great care and great love for that person, the beautiful gift of that relationship and of that loss is, like you touched on, is that incredible joy that you had this beautiful love in your life. You had someone that cared for you. You had someone that you cared for. There was a shared experience of care and compassion and relatedness and who knows what else. Of turbulence as well. We can also mourn the fact that we've lost someone that's been turbulent in our life. But it's really one of those deals where it's like, I mean, there is that importance of, when something comes up, to be able to really kind of give yourself permission to sit in it and be in that place of claiming, I am upset, I am mourning, I am in deep pain, I am in deep experience of loss and sorrow for that, you know, whatever that situation is, whether it be a job, an ecosystem, a relationship, a significant other, or a parent, or something like that. To actually like be able to give yourself permission is a primary component of our of that recovery process. There's got to be that claiming part, because if there's not a claiming part, everybody's just beating the drum of, hey, let's move on, let's get over it, you know, let it go, let it go, let it go, as the popular Disney musical talks about. It's one of those things where it's just like, that's really great, but the reality is that if you haven't paid attention to how this event has shaped you, you're going to be kind of at the mercy of it and the content that lies therein. So in our model with ITB of recovery and personal transformation, this whole conversation of claiming what you've been through should not be, you know, glazed over or taken lightly, or suggested that you should only do it for, you know, maybe, you know, only do it for a couple months. You're only allowed to feel those things for a couple of months. You're only allowed to mourn for a couple of months or something like that. This is kind of dangerous territory.
Well, and it really speaks to our culture's vilification of certain emotional states. You know, don't be too sad. I was telling Geoff yesterday, I've always watched kind of sad movies and had probably well, all of us have our mirror neuron system, which is how we empathize with one another. And mine's very much been open to sadness, and so then I'd watch a movie and be sad, but my mother in the same room would be watching it and she'd be like, what are you doing? Like, why? Like, really judgy, like, ugh, like, stop it, like, stop watching this stuff.
Yeah.
And I know for me that as a child I definitely picked up on those nuances of what states are acceptable, not only to my mother, but to my culture, and then what states are not. And so instead of crying out in public, it would be a public bathroom. It would be in a stall in a public bathroom, hidden, because I could also sense how uncomfortable my pain or my sadness would make other people. And again, recovering codependent, I wouldn't recommend it, kept taking responsibility for other people's emotional states and responses, where now if I would give my younger self advice, it would be, that's their emotions to handle.
Right.
That is their responses to handle. I need to process and handle my own, and not to devalue my own in favor of making other people, comfortable.
Yeah, indeed.
And aside from, again, appropriate like context and stuff like that, but yeah, it's almost, I would argue that it's a pathological way that our culture, again, vilifies certain emotions. And when you talk about what is tied to mourning and death and loss, I hate to break it to you if you didn't already know, not like at least not, again, to touch the beauty in death, you have to touch the death, you have to touch the sadness. I don't think you get to skip that.
Right.
So yeah, so there is beauty there, but again, it's in the pain. You have to go into the sadness, let it work you to come to have bloom with inside you a bigger heart, and to touch those things that are, ethereal, that are hard to describe, but they transform you. If these experiences
Right.
can transform you, you have to give permission. Like you said, you have to give yourself permission. You have to consent to participating in that.
Yeah.
I went through the drive-through the other day at Panera, and they didn't have macaroni and cheese, and I legit heard myself saying, okay, one moment. I said, I have to mourn that loss. Because it was during the quarantine, and it was like I felt like a legit loss. And
Awesome.
I think that lady was like, what the heck is this woman talking about? She was like, whatever. But in the moment though, I mourned it, and I was
Right.
able to move on. And see, that's the thing,
Right.
is I think you all want to move on,
Right.
but you can't let something go unless you hold it. Otherwise, you're
Yeah.
just dodging it.
Yeah.
You're really meaning just dodge this stuff, versus the let go. Don't, mind you, you have to hold on to it first to even let
Right.
go.
Yeah, I think what has been found along the way, and something that we definitely focus on in ITB, is that when a human being goes through a loss of any kind, it's a terribly personal thing. We usually attach it to the loss of a significant human being out of our life or something like that. We're mourning a death of another human being or someone that we cared about. But we have to remember that the nature of this grieving is a terribly personal thing. Grief is something that is had by us, and it's just as natural as the need for hunger or the need for rest or the need for water. And it's not until we kind of honor that it's us grieving. It's not like there's kind of like this strange, when in working with people with death, and also going through my own work with my own grieving, my own losses. What kind of shows up is like there's almost like this emotional attachment to the person. Well, they're gone, and that's what hurts, and they're the one that carries the emotion. They're the one that carries our love. That's where our relationship was, because they were here, we were together, and now they're gone. And there's almost like this kind of confusion in the carrying of the emotions. Like, I'm carrying this relationship now on my own. That person is now deceased and they're no longer physically here anymore. And so I'm left carrying this relationship. And it's kind of a funny thing where it's like I found some folks notice that, well, they're gone now, so why do I feel this? You know, why do I feel this experience, or should I feel these experiences? There's almost like this confusion of the psyche that you're actually, you are actually an active participant in the relationship. Sometimes I found that folks look at, especially parent relationships, but then also relationships with their children and friends, and sometimes romantic partners, but very much with parents and with friends. It's one of those things where oftentimes we think that the friendship is this thing that wanders around separate from us, and the friendship occurs when we're together or something like that. There's sometimes like this disembodied experience of the friendship and one thing, or of the relationship and the things that are shared in the relationship. And it appears that with a lot of folks, myself included, is that when the death occurs, it's almost like it was a deep, deep, deep reminder of, you are the one participating in the relationship. You're the one that actually carries the friendship as much as they do, or carries the relationship as much as they do. And it's not, the friendship isn't dependent on them. The parenthood and the parent relationship wasn't dependent on them. It was us. And it kind of, one of the things that death clearly does is that it really reminds us of this deep loss that's occurring, and brings it into an embodied experience, because oftentimes people's experience of grief is an out of control experience. They are just shaken to the core by the loss experience. And it's almost as if they're possessed by the experience or something along those lines. So it's interesting how death, I think, really tells us a story of, this is something that lives inside of you. Your relationship lives inside of you. It's not dependent on this external binding. It's based off of your care and concern about the relationship lives within you. And when death comes, it reminds us of, holy shit, I actually gave a shit about this human being, and I was cared about. And one of the things I hear from a lot of folks in working with doing grief work is, I had no idea how much they meant to me. It's a really curious kind of a statement. Or they'll say something like, I had no idea it was going to impact me this much, especially with a parent that they didn't like too much, or they didn't identify with a lot. And it's a very kind of a curious type of a situation where we really think the relationship is out of our body. The relationship is somewhere else. And when death comes home, it's, wow, it's here. This stuff is actually inside of me. And it kind of speaks to how we just don't claim stuff. We don't really claim responsibility for, I care for this person. We really don't know how to kind of hold the care and concern, hold the emotional content of whatever relationship we have with us. And this is one of the reasons why with the full recovery phases of uncovering, claiming, and emergence, why these things can be so startling to realize that when I uncover something in my psyche, I uncover that I deeply care for someone. It's like, oh my God, the light switch went on. Holy shit, I care for someone. I come to the conclusion of, I have this great care for someone, or I have this great resentment with someone. And they uncover this reality. And the last thing we need to do is move on from that. No matter what it feels like, whether it feels really good and aches and feels like love, or if it really aches and makes us feel gross and makes us a little bit agitated, like a resentment or something along those lines. So no, it's kind of curious that we do have this in our current culture. A lot of activity with a lot of folks is just this hands-off type of, ooh, I felt it, I don't like that, let's move on type of a situation. And what we find in ITB and a lot of other schools of thought is that the actual integration, the actual, like you touched on with the mac and cheese example, is that if we actually make time and space for that claiming, for holding it and letting it work us, like you said, give over ourselves to the grieving process, give ourselves over, kind of surrendering to the love that we had, to the care that we experienced, to the ups and downs and tumultuousness of the relationship we had, if we surrender to that, it appears, and we want to carry this idea lightly, that the mourning process moves a little bit smoother, that the mourning process doesn't break our life the way it can. Okay, meaning like a relapse to a substance, or some great upheaval in our professional life or personal life. So making time, what we've noticed is that making time for that stuff, claiming it and letting it work us, seems to allow for our quote unquote day-to-day activities, or the mundane sides of our life, seems to move slow or more smoothly, and there's space for everything. You know, as we talk about in ITB quite often, there is room for all these things. There's room for you to do your job perfectly fine. There's also room for you to lose your shit in your bedroom because you've just lost, you know, this thing you care about, this person you care about. And I think that's, like you touched on it, that's a major component of being human, and being a human being in mourning, a human being carrying the dead. So I think those are, like, it's really kind of sweet how the mac and cheese example was so timely, so perfect. That was awesome.
Yes. Yeah. And what I really, looking back now, what I am one of the most grateful things about ITB was, you know, I had a pretty solid background, I would say, in spirituality, a little bit in psychology, but in all my years of this spirituality and just living my life, it was very much like here, right?
Oh, right on.
Here. And so, you know, ITB being founded by a massage therapist, a body worker. And in the early days, ITB would be like, your mind is here, like all, like, you're going,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
oh, that is your
This
mind.
is your mind. This is not just your mind. This is your mind. Yeah.
Because I will say, for me, here is too small. It's
Right.
too small, and I often find this ready to check out quite readily.
Right.
Of like, nope, and it hurts, and it's restrictive. Where now the processing facilities, faculties that I have is my entire system.
Right. Right.
Everything
Right.
from my body and my fascial system and my nervous system and my heart-centered awareness. Um, I live a more centered life here in that heart center versus everything trying to just be processed here. And the thing about this space is, again, it's very quick to rationalize. It's very quick to move on.
Very quick to
Um,
fix, right? To be
it's
like, oh, we're all
very,
done with that, right? Yeah.
you know, Brene Brown talks how humans are so hardwired for story that when we complete a story, we actually get a dopamine hit in our body where we're like, I figured it out. And, you know, when it comes to, again, the weight of mourning, of grief,
Right.
it is so multifaceted. You know, it would be, yes, your mother that is your biological birth mother, but it would also be the symbol of mother.
Right.
You know, the archetypal energies of mother, would also be your ancestral, that DNA that resides in you, the epigenetics that has changed your DNA coding over the years. That would be processed through with the loss, because my DNA has processed the loss of thousands of ancestors over thousands and thousands of years, is all
Right.
again in here.
Right.
And putting the center here, I think reduces those dimensions, that one can go through. So a fully dimensional process, it will take a while.
Yeah.
You know, it'll take a while, but that's okay. No rush.
Yeah. Right. You touched on a really great point there, where for a lot of folks, which is the experience of possibly a parent or a person in family or in your surroundings that we sometimes maybe didn't have much of a relationship with. This happens oftentimes with absentee parents of certain kinds or different things along those lines, as well as grandparents, kind of a closer immediate family. And one thing that comes up oftentimes is this reality that when we do have, like you said, the mourning of the actual person, that's a very real thing, and that relationship is going to have its own dynamics. And then the other reality is that a lot of the hangups that happen between parent child is both parties, the parent and the child, have kind of like this projection and need for the other. And so the parent has, no matter what they say, the parent has this projection of the kind of child they want to have, right? It lives inside the parent. It's natural. It's not horrible. It's not a rejection oftentimes of the child that shows up. But there is a real thing inside of us human beings that does have this experience of what we hope that comes out of us, comes out of this creation and the kind of child that we want. The child has the same thing. The child oftentimes the disagreement between parent child is the child is in need of a certain flavor of parent, and the parent isn't there. That flavor of parent is not there. And so the child carries, almost like there's two mournings that occur when that parent dies. The experience of not only whether it's a pleasant relationship or a tumultuous relationship or an even mixture of both, when the actual parent dies, they have that mourning. And then also oftentimes what people are kind of is way off their radar is what you're kind of touching on there, which is that experience of every child has their perception of the parent they wish they had. And that also seems to have this deathing process that occurs for the child in relationship when that parent goes. Now, that child may be experiencing a lot of the psychological agitation prior to the parent dying because they're not getting the right flavor of parent that they quote unquote need. But they definitely, when the parent comes to an end physically, then that material can come up that much stronger. So some people feel these experiences of, they had a pleasant relationship with their parent, and now this whole new spectrum of pain also shows up in their mourning process of not just mourning who they had as a parent, but also recognizing that inside of them lives, at most likely a different age, this whole other mourning that's occurring, because that's a child or a voice inside of them that's mourning the parent that they hoped they had. And that can be a real potent mourning as well. And that can be way off the radar for a lot of folks. So that can, it kind of wasn't, that idea kind of was inspired by your point there of part of the beauty of learning more and more about ITB and the psyche of our human psychology and archetypes is understanding that we even mourn these archetypal experiences, and this archetypal material is something that we're all subject to, and we have to kind of relate to and have to, remember is going to work us to a certain extent, because we do have these models in our head and hopes and needs in our biology and psychology. So it's pretty interesting stuff that you touch on there. That's pretty cool stuff. Some of the, I kind of wanted to jump into cultural practices, so please hop in whenever you want, Sarah. Some cultural practices and some things that we can do to kind of, like, we've talked about grief and mourning. We've given some kind of ideas about how ITB talks about them, and we've talked about the uncovering, claiming, and emerging. And we've touched on like this kind of significance of the claiming side of thing. And, Sarah's talked about this, gathering of people in to just kind of have their pain, have their mourning. And when one does take a survey of deathing practices and cultural practices towards deathing, from our most ancient ancestors to more traditional religious experiences that we have these days, that's a lot of what these institutions oftentimes provide. Is they provide territories for the wallowing, for the wailing, for the raging, for the agitation. They make space for it. And in a lot of traditions, it's the responsibility of the community to do it, not the person who's actually experiencing the grief or the mourning. There's a lot of traditions that say, you should not be handling your own, especially in the first week after a death, and the time frames change dramatically depending on what culture you're looking at. But especially in the short period of time after the event of the death, the people closest to the person who's passed away should not be doing a lot of their normal stuff. So I can think of, in the Jewish tradition, there's Kiddush and sitting Kiddush and sitting there and sitting in that experience of, you're not supposed to be managing your affairs. You're not supposed to be doing your laundry or cleaning your house. Literally, cover up all the mirrors in the house so you don't have to worry about your appearance or anything like that, because you're probably going to be a mess. And we're giving space for you to have that mess. And we're giving, you don't cook your meals, you don't do a bunch of this other stuff. You just kind of be a part of that experience of the loss. And hopefully you're with, or in most cases, you're with other people who have also are experiencing the loss as well, and your other family members and things along those lines.
Well,
We see that. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, and how often subconsciously do we take those kind of, washing the dishes as a coping mechanism?
Yeah,
So
100%.
here we can see wisdom in some of these older traditions, where I don't know if they mindfully put that together, but I think to a certain extent maybe understood that, yeah, now is not a time for your coping mechanisms. We don't want you to cope through this right now.
Yeah, right.
We want to give you space to just feel it, to just honor that other person, to let the story work you, to let the story of life, death, life cycle work you. And if you're busy cleaning the house, or you got to entertain or whatever, again, that's a lot of the logistics and that calculated.
Yeah, that's right.
Coming up to, I need to balance my checkbook.
Right.
So I'm up here and I'm not in here, and I'm not in, because really, like, when we even seen Geoff, talk about the grief, you can see, and me too, our hands are here. Like
Yeah.
we're referring back to like our torso and our body and all that kind of stuff, because that is, at least for me, where I feel it, whether it be the pit of my stomach or my heart or my shoulders tension or whatever it is. The grief is, again, it's a big one. So your entire operating system it needs to be fully involved, or should be fully
Right.
involved.
Yeah.
Again, this is too narrow a space.
And it very much is a whole body experience. And this is what some of our most ancient traditions, indigenous populations especially, where there was, in these processes, there was the community participated in the recognition of the loss. And so there would oftentimes, if a member of the community was, and we're talking about ancient tribal stuff here and the continual tribal practices that occur in the world for our indigenous populations, the ceremonies were very much a community dance. They were a community gathering where there would be music, there would be a fire, there would be action, there would be a specific dance oftentimes that was a part of a mourning activity. They were very clear that during the dance you were given permission to lose control and wail and rage however you needed to. There was always those who were around you that were your community, that were there just creating a container space, a territory for those to mourn. There was this wholehearted invitation to just, to use our current language, to really just lose your shit and have the experience that's of that loss for you, what was real for you in that kind of context. And the mindset there for the community and for the elders of the community was, they saw how often, if we didn't resolve a mourning process, how it kind of ate at the community. Because if that person didn't have the opportunity to go through the mourning process, it caused more and more and more and more tumultuousness within the community the farther out we went. So in a period of time where we were a lot more interwoven in our community and we all very much knew each other, if one person or a group or a family was struggling with a mourning process and there wasn't enough space, that really impacted the rest of us. And even worse, if they then continued to do other dangerous practices to the community, we would see even more trouble kind of continuing on. from that lost opportunity to grieve. And this was considered a very, 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 as far as medicine keepers were concerned and elders were concerned, this was very dangerous stuff. If you didn't make time to grieve, you're courting a possible community breakdown. And it's so curious how different that is in, instead of a we-centered culture, there's an I-centered culture like we oftentimes see here in the States, where there's just not enough room made for that mourning process. You don't get paid leave when you're a parent or a child or somebody dies, you don't get paid leave for that. I mean, hell, we have a hard enough time fighting for pregnant mothers, after they give birth, having their leave paid. Nobody pays attention to giving you money for a loss of a parent or a loss of a loved one. For having to mourn a major life event, even a quote unquote pet in our culture is a major family member, if that's the only family member you get touch from. So there's the reality that we just don't make space oftentimes for what loss is. And this is something that's really kind of starkly different from a more kind of we focused culture and more community focused culture. And definitely there is this representation in these ancient traditions that, and some of the stuff that's continued on today, of making sure that you have that time. Because if you don't have that time to mourn, it's a shit show later on, man. This stuff is going to come for you. And in ITB, that's one thing that we deal with on a regular basis with folks is, the majority of the people that usually walk through our doors and hire us are people who just have not made time for their life, to be in their body, to be in their life. And now shit's hitting the fan, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they're just, raging and coming apart at the seams, but they think everything's right as rain. They just have this problem with their romantic partner. They just have this job issue, they just have this anger management thing that everybody thinks I have a problem with. There really is, once again, if you don't make time for it, there's not enough attention on, wow, I really am kind of losing it here. I don't actually see how much danger I'm in.
Did you see the movie Midsummer?
Oh yes, no doubt about it. Yeah, it was a beautiful representation of that.
Oh.
Yeah, this was like when if you haven't seen the movie, this is a beautiful experience. It's considered a horror movie because I notice a lot of people do get really upset about it. There are very compelling, scary things in it, for some portions of the population, but there's also some really beautiful stuff. And one of the things that I thought was wonderful was, and I think you're kind of alluding to, is when our main character was crying and raging, her fellow females were just like intense eye contact all around her, breathing and raging and weeping together.
Yeah.
I was like, oh wow, that's powerful medicine right there.
And because it really is, I mean, again, I keep talking about how heavy it is, and to carry that on your own, even within, let's just talk about the physicality, the anatomy of our system, that is your nervous system. As you're going into fight or flight, to resist the reality of, say, the loss of your father,
Right.
to disconnect them from your community, where there are, we can see the difference between a we space community versus an I space community. And the we space say, I will shoulder this load in a very actual gross realm way of, let us all dance and maybe touch each other, so that one nervous system now is 12 or 24 or 30 that can handle the vibration, that can handle the agitation, versus an individual trying to again process it as something so life altering all on your own. And then I can see when let's say you don't have that space, right, then that fight or flight gets trapped, and then trapped again and trapped again. I mean, as far as like it's trying to work its way through, and that individual kind of, rugged individualism of the American spirit. It's again, it's okay in certain instances, but the community to carry that weight is just such a huge is such a huge difference. And then yeah, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, the driving inward, the challenge is often we turn the story in and on ourselves, that we are weak. Why is
Yes,
it so
yes.
bothering me? I mean, without your community to say, to empathize and to say, I'm really struggling with the loss of my father, and to have a trusted friend to say, that's okay, and I'm here with you, and that hurt me too, versus alone in your living room, harshly judging yourself. Why am I still feeling like this? I must be weak. There must be something wrong with me. I have to put on so many. Then you start with your layers of masks and your layers and layers and layers.
Right.
And then, yeah, 20 years later, you're living under not only the weight of the original mourning and trauma, grief, but I would venture to say now you have many more layers of again, just the self-judgment that goes with that.
Yeah,
But
sure.
speaking specifically to the mourning with the group versus the mourning as an individual. Yeah.
100%. What was really beautiful about what we're showing in Midsommar with those scenes was that concept of containment, and what a we territory creates, what a we culture, what a we focus culture really creates is, in a positive way, is a containment for us to, face up to these profound events. Like death and birth are profound events. And in our own, as we're young human beings, facing up to the reality of those things is monumental for the mind oftentimes. And we may, we adults may have this ability to rationalize it, like, okay, yeah, there's birth, there's death, and we have other little, sweet kind of whimsical ways of kind of rationalizing it, and saying it's part of nature, it's part of life, this is a life that's going away, and there's new life coming into the world. And these are sweet gestures, but there's also the reality that death, one of the things that also death shows us is that death shows us the unreasonableness of existence, is that there's no reasoning with it. There's no way you're going to avoid these things. And it kind of brings us in stark, very, very stark ways, brings us face to face with, you have no control in relationship to this. You're dealing with unreasonable forces in the universe, which, kind of makes a whole lot of sense why our ancestors identified them as powers, as power sources, as deities, and anthropomorphized them, made them into these creatures, and made them into these things to relate to and make relationship to. And so, it's really important. I think along the way, one of the beauties of it is that we do come to terms with the fact that I'm an individual dealing with this completely unreasonable force in the cosmos. And one of the things I noticed in my own mourning process was there was a story in my head that said, I should be able to handle this.
On your own?
Yeah, I should be able to handle this. I mean, I would reflect on my life and on my education and on my journey heretofore through these spiritual realms, and doing all this other work, and doing a lot of shadow work, doing a lot of therapy. And now here I am facing these deaths. And afterwards, I was, during the process and afterwards, the huge realization was, I literally have this story that says this ridiculous point of awareness with this really ridiculous persona and storyline believes that it can handle death, believes that it can manage death. Yeah. This force that's in this cosmos that is partnered with creation and dissolution, I think I can manage that. What a fucking ordeal that is.
Yeah.
And I was I remember distinctly, I was beating myself up about, man, this, I think I was watching something and something shook me up, and I started crying and started going into some real raging. And then afterwards I was like, man, I had no idea. I thought I was kind of through some of that stuff. I thought I was over some of this stuff. You hear the story, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, man, what, that's really interesting. And for whatever reason, this thought snuck in of like, I just saw myself tell the story that I'm supposed to be able to manage death. and the hubris of that, and the elevation of of my psyche and of my ego, of thinking I'm supposed to be able to deal with that. And that was a huge relief off my shoulders. I kind of let myself off the hook of being done with it. And it was this huge realization of, holy shit, man, I don't have a say-so in this to a certain extent. I definitely didn't have a say-so in their death. And I kind of don't have a say-so in relationship to death in general, and how this is working me. What I do have a say-so in is being awake to it, and is being willing to receive it and to have what's alive inside of me. I do have a say-so about that. And if I reject it, there's going to be collateral damage. But if I let it in, I get some kind of payoff. Now, it may not be a payoff I'm aware of in the moment, but I see the payoff. And that was a huge shift for me, that realization of, holy shit, I don't have to manage death. I don't have to know what to do with this, man. I don't have to actually contain death in order to recover and complete my mourning process. And so the whole time frame, a lot of my storyline stuff just got kind of dumped at that moment. And there was the realization of, holy shit, I've been kind of holding myself to this inhuman story. Like, there's no human being that's ever going to be able to manage this. You know, this is a thing this is the origin of the cosmos. It's as ancient as creation is dissolution. So why on earth would I blame myself for not being able to be responsible for that and carry that and manage death better? It's a huge revelation. And that, I think, is what a community will do for us as we mourn. Anything is give us that opportunity to recognize, you know, you're just a fucking human being. You're just this human being that this is happening to. You didn't make them dead. You're not responsible as dead. You're not the one who controls death. This is something that's happening to you. And I think that's one of the beauties of how people recover, is when they give opportunity for themselves to be contained by a community, even if it's just a small group or a single person. When we have permission to be contained and we don't have to do mourning, we just let it happen to us. This is where we start to talk about carrying the dead. Okay, this is how we carry the dead, how we carry our life, how we, you know, death is this thing, and I have this bowl of death I get to carry along. It's not mine, it's just what I got for now. And then how do I proceed to celebrate the dead? And I think that's probably one of the greatest gifts that our ancient people's traditions and a lot of other religious traditions really teach us about death is, you're going to have to rage and be had by death, be had by the mourning process. And I think that's of great importance for folks to come to realization with and come to terms with along the way. So.
Right on. That's what Geoff will say. If you hang around with Geoff long enough, you'll hear him say, right on. Yeah, that's absolutely. Right, really beautiful. Surrender element is, you know, I read a quote once where it said, you know, when I am the weakest, I am the strongest.
Right.
You know, and ultimately, I think, again, it's the valuing of one side of a coin. You know, I can't hand you a quarter and be like, only value the head side of this quarter, right, not the tail side. It's not worth anything, only the head side. So when it comes to power and control, guess what's the other side of that? You know, what are the other sides to, you know, what I think culturally, we're told to value. You can't just value one side of the coin. And you, I would venture to say, you are not. So, you know, when the coin starts working, when you go, I'm so strong, I am so strong, or I am so brave, I am so brave, and you are calling bravery to you, then you are calling cowardice as well.
That's right, yeah.
Because they go together.
Right.
And that splitting of being like, I am brave, but I am not a coward. I am strong, but I am not weak.
Right.
I can just see it really, again, manifest in our systems and in our psyches, that kind of fracturing.
Yep.
That You know, in shamanism, they talk about going and collecting your soul before you die. And to
Yeah.
me, that always translated to, again, those parts of me that I've split off for whatever reason, to actually go back and collect that. And yeah, the going back too is in honoring that space in the past and whatever age, you know, the loss went through. I really encourage my clients to be that 6-year-old. I mean, I need you to be that 6-year-old, because that 6-year-old is what needs to be heard. I don't need to hear you at 30 explaining what the 6-year-old's trying to say.
Exactamundo. Yeah.
um, and I again would also argue how much resolution really can come from, again, that rational mind trying to figure out the mystery of death.
Yeah, exactly right. Thinking that it can figure it out.
I'm gonna keep out the mystery of death.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just let death work you. Let the sadness work you. With consent, of course, always with consent, because too, the consent makes a huge difference. You can't consent to the surrender, you will resist it.
That's
And
right.
again,
Yeah.
in a very physical way, your ears will go towards your shoulder. You will get tightness in your chest and tightness in your fascia and muscles. For just, I am not gonna let manifest this sadness, this anger,
Right.
whatever it
Right.
is.
Right.
Hold tight on that. And again, in a very literal, gross realm, you are legitimate clamping down in your system of allowing these things to manifest.
Right. 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 So we got some cultural ideas going on. Some of the practices of, you know, a group mourning practice. Some of the things that we suggest that we've been taught by our ancient peoples is some annual remembrances. Is that what we notice that, and science backs this up really beautifully, is that the annual experience of a trauma and death kind of gets the death or loss of someone kind of gets lumped into this kind of conversation of trauma, is that the body does respond to the annual cycles of things. The body does, we do notice when people are not paying attention to the calendar period of time of an annual process occurring in the body. When they're not paying attention to that relationship, to that past trauma, their body still goes through some type of response to it. So an example would be if I got mugged in, in the beginning of May 2019, when I come around to 2020, that experience is going to show up in my body to a certain extent and show up in my psyche. It's very, very, very curious. It happens in month categories. It happens also in 12-month periods as well. So the body does have this kind of remembrance experience and does go through this cyclical experience. And once again, in ancient people's traditions, this was a thing. So on the anniversary, and several religions that are currently popular in our world now, there still is the remembrance period. The 1-year period afterwards is a big deal. And so being very mindful of that, our body is just physiologically hardwired to deal with this stuff, also gives us permission to be human throughout this process. Personal anniversaries are super duper important. That also shows up in a lot of traditions, is these personal anniversaries creating moments in relationship to not just the loss of other human beings, but the loss of other situations, other events. And it's not just a collective anniversary practice. Oftentimes it'll also be a very individual oriented one. We do also suggest that stuff. The other thing that comes along with a lot of cultural practices when it comes to grieving and mourning is some type of body alteration, body modification. So this could can happen in a whole host of different ways when it comes to mourning. There are several Northern Native American tribes that will cut their hair or will do different things in order to modify their body. Sometimes scarification, tattoos, piercings, different things along those lines, wearing different items on their body, bones or feathers, or presentation of garb in some way to represent to themselves and for their own process that they're going through this experience. One of these things that I think is really beautiful is it kind of covers a lot of these kind of points, which is in Judaism, they have something called a kriya. And the kriya is a rending of clothes. So you're in a public experience, you're in a public space, and you're in specific clothes to keep yourself modest and cared for. Of course, you're not wanting to, the whole point isn't to expose yourself, but the point is to tear these clothes that mean something to you. And in a lot of also traditions, to the tearing of the clothes is the representation of how you have been torn, how your life has been torn, how your situation has dramatically shifted, and how you're presenting yourself and what you wear and how you're contained. But then the other thing is that you usually don't throw those clothes away. What you usually do is you mend them. So you show, it's kind of like this symbolic gesture of look how I've been ripped, look how I've been opened up and changed. And also notice, I'll continue to wear this jacket, shirt, outfit, whatever, but there's going to be the mended portion of it. And it kind of speaks to this experience of there was this great loss, and look how there's now, it goes from a wound into a scar space. And yes, I have a scar, but that's just a sign of my existence. We see this happening in a number of different traditions around the world. And so as we're kind of moving more and more into this conversation, moving towards, what do we do with this now? Well, we've talked a little bit about mourning. How do I do this in my life? And that's kind of like a nice little segue. You had some things you want to talk about, what we talked about the other day, about talking about age, and that you were kind of pushing into. So you want to go into some of that age stuff a little bit more, about being age appropriate, saying a little bit more about making sure we embody the age in which the loss was?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and again, embody, I'm sure we need to do a drinking game between Geoff and I saying embody a million times. But it's just, it's so important.
I can see it now. I can see it now. And the the YouTube comments are going to be, yeah, we did a game about how many times they said integrated or ITB or embodying, and we're all bombed out of our minds at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do want to say real quick though, when you were talking about the ripping of the clothes, what struck me, and I'd like to share, is when the death comes, we don't have the choice, right? There's not the choice there, but the wisdom in seeing the ceremonies, and now we do have a bit more of a choice place of participating in that at least symbolic realm now of tearing myself open, of showing how I am, that symbolism of vulnerability, where at first, the vulnerability hits you like a ton of bricks, because you are vulnerable to the life-death cycle of the universe. But the ceremonies and the rituals, creating that space for now a mindful and connective surrender and vulnerability, that again, that we're consenting to participating in our own healing, and to use those ceremonies and rituals to, again, it's such a big thing. We need to create space on a lot of different levels, within our community level, within those parts of our brains that are ancient, that do recognize ritual, again, from thousands and thousands of years, and ceremony from thousands and thousands of years, of bringing all those along. An integral theory, that's basically a theory that was put together. I always describe it as a mapping of human potential. They were like, if you can have the most fulfilled life, like, let's try to map this. And it's crazy. Integral theory is crazy huge, because again, human potential is like crazy huge. And how much does it touch on? I mean, it's so big. But one of the benefits of learning integral theory is that you learn stages of consciousness.
Right.
They go along with your stages of, and they often will go along with the stages of your biological development as well. So at 3 years old, you have the magic mythic stage of development, and that is your reality. That is magic, absolutely, is very real. I remember my daughter seeing Elmo on TV. This is not a puppet. This is a legit red monster that loved her very much. She was not questioning that. And then you get a little bit older and you get to roles and rules, and then you get a little bit older and you're supposed to be getting to rational stages of consciousness and up and up and up. And when the losses happen or the traumas happen at whatever stage they happen, to process that undigested material at, say, the rules stage of consciousness when you're about 7 years old, there is just, I want to beg you to tell you how important it is.
Right.
Get back down to the rules, because this is the stage that experienced it. It's not the rational or pluralistic stage that experienced it. It's not coding itself, so to speak, at this higher stage, and again at like 30, 40 years old. It is coded at rules, which has its own parameter. It has its own definitions of things. It has its own parameters. So, you lose someone at rules stage of development, to go back down to that 7-year-old, and you can work there as far as like, what did that mean at 7 that I lost my mom? And so my 7-year-old goes, well, now I'm the mom.
Yeah.
Now I need to take over that role. Or maybe that I'm not supposed to lose my mom at 7. This is not the rule. The rule is I lose my mom when I lose my mom when she's 70.
Right.
40, versus a 7-year-old. I mean, and it destroys, right, that kind of real subtle cultural promises, especially experiencing death as a child, because there are so many of us that don't experience death as a child, that it's just, I think it's kind of expected sometimes that you're like, no, I'm not gonna be exposed to this because I'm a kid. So the embodiment practice of getting to these ages is absolutely, it is an embodiment. So you're going to move your body.
Right.
You're going to get into a physical position, because again, the mind is head to toe. If you want to access the information that was stored in your system at 7, within the cognitive mind. And that's the other thing, is we are expecting way too much out of children as far as them able to code appropriately.
Yeah.
Like what is happening to them at 7. It's way more instinctual. It's way more, especially at the age you're talking, mammalian brain, that midbrain that is the cerebellum and such, that's just the feelings, that limbic system, pardon me, not the cerebellum, that limbic system, that mammalian brain that's processing again on a not so cognitive level,
right,
not rational, because again, how do you rationalize the loss of a parent at 7 years old? And I will also say that a lot of times, again, those stories are not very flattering to us. What did I do to, I deserve it. Child will absolutely tell the story. Well, they will cast themselves as the predator, or the whatever it is, as I deserve this.
right,
and I shouldn't have handled. I yelled at my mom and I told her to go to hell at 7, and then you carry guilt. But the truth is that was that 7-year-old. You absolutely have every right to have had whatever feelings you had at 7. So creating space for yourself, and if the 7-year-old pops up and says, I'm terrible, I yelled at my mom. One lesson that I learned through the ITB process is the best thing that I've ever done was to agree with the younger voices versus argue and say, no,
right,
you weren't.
Right.
Like you're trying to make it feel better, but that's not really the point, is it? We're trying to see how bad it feels.
Yeah.
Agree and say, yes, yup, okay, so you were a terrible person. And then the next thing that comes up will often be so much wisdom for what was really happening to you there. Because ultimately, it's all the self relationship doesn't deviate much from an external relationship. If I'm in a relationship with Geoff and he's trying to tell me how he feels and I keep shutting it down, pretty soon Geoff's going to be like, yeah, I'm not talking to her anymore. Like, she's not really listening. Like, I don't know what to say. She keeps making excuses.
Right.
She keeps, again, trying to dodge this, or says, no, you shouldn't feel sad, or all these shoulds. Slows down that healing. You have to admit that you have the wound first before the healing can even start. So physical movements of what you felt like as a child, fetal positions. I find that I stroke my hair when I start. Hair, that's a younger thing. What brought you comfort. Anything you can do to stimulate that neurology that runs through your system. And they have a saying in neuroscience, what fires together wires together.
Right.
When we do that kind of exploration, it's not, our systems are not like real simplistic filing cabinets where it's just that this is here. You're talking, it'd probably be better to picture like the web of thousands of filing cabinets all wiring together. And again, with ITB, when I first started with ITB, I had very successfully numbed so much of my reality, through that rational thought of I shouldn't feel like this. I don't think there was a way that I could have been reached outside of we are body workers. We started touching.
Right.
I was, my system, the stuff that I had, again, repressed so significantly and thoroughly, I was very good at it. Lots of drinking. I'll give credit to the booze too. That it's slippery. The psyche is slippery, but there's a lot of truth though that is found in the body. And so if you're having a challenge getting in touch with those lower stages of consciousness, those younger experiences, going through the body is a really brilliant way of circumventing a lot of those rational and coping mechanisms that make you strong, like you should be like this. And all that story, all those scripts, I think that we often run. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, you touch on a really good point here that I wanted to check in with about like guidelines of if we could say it like some guidelines about mourning or about the grieving process or carrying the dead. Like one of them is that reality that you make space for these ages to show up is kind of what I'm hearing from you in this dialogue, is that we do kind of make specific territory for allowing for not only, maybe we've done a lot of work to allow the, whatever our age is, if we're 30 years old and we've lost our parent or lost a loved one, we instinctually, like you've touched on, make room for that 30-year-old to mourn. But we forget the fact that there's the majority of our anchoring memories, especially with a parent or a sibling, the majority of our anchoring memories comes from a very early age. And the same thing goes for possibly things that are outside of a human being or a human relationship, things having to do with like a house, a house you grew up in or an ecosystem that you're used to. And it doesn't even have to be something you have a long history with. If it quenches, if a romantic relationship that's maybe only, a couple months or a couple years old, if that really fed a lot of your layers of your humanity, meaning the most mature portions of you, as well as a lot of the younger portions of you, your whole system is going to mourn the loss of that thing. So we want to be careful with saying like, oh, well, that relationship was only 6 months, so I shouldn't be mourning this much. Well, you got to be careful with that, because if that relationship really, ticked a lot of boxes for all the different ages of agitation in you, you're not mourning that 6 months. It's not just the 30-year-old or whatever age you are that's mourning that relationship. You're mourning, the other layers of you are also mourning that experience and what they were getting out of that. And so one of the beautiful things that Integral does, and thus ITB does, is it does remind us of the wholeness and our complexity of our humanity. And so when we do face any loss, it does make room for us to one of our first suggestion about boundaries is make a space for yourself to mourn the thing. Like, first and foremost, give yourself permission to mourn it. And if you can, as best as you can, invite yourself to not put a time frame on it, just to see how it goes and to discover what arises in the mourning process.
Yeah.
So making that first boundary of, it's okay for me to mourn whatever it is, a job, future vacation plans. Right now, we're all in this pandemic, and most recently in the past several days, we're dealing with different types of rebellion and protests from all over the world. We're dealing a lot with it here in the States, but a lot of the rest of the world is rallying to what's going on here in the States. And so we're really dealing with some really intense trauma for our humanity. And within that is the losses, is the pain of mourning the human experience and the injustice that goes on. And so just giving ourselves permission, even if I'm so far from possibly, as a white person, to a certain extent, feeling a real distance between, what persons of color have to deal with on a regular basis, it's still okay for me to have the experience of mourning what the hell is going on in this country, mourning what's happening. It's not identical to what's happening for a lot of the persons of color in the United States, but there's totally grounds for feeling that experience. And quite honestly, that gives us more commonality between these so-called boundaries of races, gives us more commonality, gives us more integration, gives us more opportunity to be in solidarity with each other. And so we kind of want to, first and foremost, when it comes to the boundaries of mourning, give yourself permission to actually have the experience, and not to, as we've touched on already, not to judge yourself as, as wrong or inappropriate, or or being too emotional, or being ridiculous, or being too far from the experience to have any investment in it. The reality is that we are community-based beings. We are social creatures. So when we see our social structures and our community in tumult, we're gonna have an experience.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully that experience is one of solidarity, not of rejection, and not of, numbness. But, you never know with human beings. We're weird creatures. But first and foremost, the hope is to create that experience of, make a space for yourself. Make a space to give yourself permission to mourn whatever you are mourning. And then one other thing that the next thing we want to make sure of is, as we go forwards with these boundaries, if you're going to include anybody, sure as shit, make sure they're capable of it. Okay? Make sure whoever you invite into your mourning process earns the right to be a part of your mourning process. So including just, your random friend or a random family member, or a person that maybe you've had some really good times with, but has no experience with this grieving process, doesn't understand what it is, maybe looking to them isn't the greatest idea. Seeking out someone who is, like we're talking about here with ITB, a lot of the ITB, all the stewards are capable of kind of containing this stuff. Like Sarah's talking about, creating this space for just kind of wallowing and being in the pain. We gotta find folks, if you're going to kind of enlist and include others in your mourning and grieving process, which you don't have to. I do recommend it if you can find them, but it's not a mandatory technically. It goes better if you do, but it's also, if you can't find the right people, don't include shitty people in the
Yeah, that's what
relationship
I'm
to
saying.
it.
Don't default to someone that's not so great, because
Right.
they can really derail that process.
It can be a real hang up, because a lot of people's first experience when we're grieving, their first response is to make everything all better, to fix things, to make you feel better. And that is directly contrary to what we're talking about when we're getting into the grieving process. If you're gonna grieve, if you have your grief coming up, if you have whatever experiences from the loss that you're experiencing coming up, the last thing you need to do is be around some people who want to fix you and make you feel better and not feel that stuff anymore. And so this is why we say be very, 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 very judgmental and judicious and discerning about who you're actually including in that circle and in that container. Counselors should be able to do this. Therapists should be able to do this. Some massage therapists can do this. Every steward of ITB can do this. Friends and family, man, it's real shaky, those probabilities, all right? So I would be cautious with that. And if you're going to a religious organization or spiritual organization for what they're offering, I would interview the crap out of them and really get comfortable with whatever their practice is. I really, really love how Brene Brown talks about people have to earn your trust. And what did you say the other day? We were talking about this, about
Yeah,
the people who you trust.
yeah, she goes, the people that you trust with your story should, the list should fit on a postage stamp.
Yeah, it really kind of reverses the storyline of someone else. I love how she talks about this. Someone else has to earn the right to your sacred stories. Someone else and your grief is a sacred story. And so people have to earn the right to that. They have to prove that they can carry that with you, carry your life with you as a partner, not just a fix-it kind of a character.
Well, and I would go as far to say, and it might be a little hyperbole, but I've been known.
Go for it.
The level of, honestly, dehumanization that can happen in the in the interactions where someone comes up to you and I've always seen like a look in their eye where they go, oh yeah, I heard that you had a really tough week, and they're like excited for your misery.
Right, they're getting high off of the emotional content, right?
Yeah, because you are not really a human.
That's right.
It's a dehumanizing kind of thing. And whether I think that we cognitively recognize that or not, again, our system recognizes it.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to come back from that, from just those little interactions, and to not be afraid to say, yeah, but I'm not going to talk about it. Or go, yeah, I'm not going to share that with you. And again, whatever response they have. But if that boundary is too permeable, then the container's busted. And then again, all the coping mechanisms come in, and all you're trying to do is just scramble to right the ship after someone just punched a gigantic hole in it.
Right.
And I would say, then don't do that to yourself, because you are struggling, as you should. This is a big deal. So don't compound that with sharing with the wrong person, or sharing with people that are just there to get a little bit of drama. They like the drama. I've noticed how there's a difference between story and drama.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And your story is story, and there is weight to that, of what happened to you. And the people that love the drama, that is a more absolutely dehumanizing place.
Yeah, that can be dangerous territory. I agree.
And that wounds. So you're wounding on top of a wound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. that
So,
happens, and if that happens enough, if I could say, if that happens enough, you're then going to have an allergic reaction to feeling any kind of vulnerability with yourself, because so many folks have blindly, usually unconsciously, really sunk your ship in relationship to that, put you into that dehumanizing experience. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant point. So far we would suggest that in any kind of mourning that we're having, making some territory for yourself. That means maybe a place in your home. It doesn't have to be in your home. When I was caretaking for my mother and grandmother, there wasn't any safe space in my home. So, because I was living with them. And so I did a lot of my own raging and my own mourning in my own car. And so that was a safe space for me. So I would drive to a park or a parking lot where there was a lot of anonymity and not a lot of context and contact. And I would be able to just kind of have my own space, and that would be that. And so if you don't have a place at home, you can kind of, and if you have the opportunity of a vehicle, then you can kind of create these type of spaces. You can also hike into territories and move into spaces of different kinds in the external environment. Even if it's just like a camping trip or something like that, or even if it's just, even if it has to get to a place where you're in actually a public restroom with a certain amount of privacy, that can also be an experience. So what we hope is that you make these boundaries for yourself and then let yourself kind of set a timer with it. Oftentimes what I did and what I've suggested with other folks is create a time for yourself to mourn and rage in that way. Now, mourning is constantly occurring to us when we have this stuff. But actually carving out a part of our day, even if it's as simple as small as something like 15 or 20 minutes, to make space to say to ourselves and to say to the rest of the awareness inside of us and to our system, to say, now is the time for me to just rage if I need to. And it is also appropriate for you to use some triggers for that, listening to music or looking at pictures or different things along those lines, to give yourself space. If you need to, like most of us do, actually move into the head space and the body space of feeling that loss, feeling whatever emotions come with the loss. You may need some prompts to get into that because you're so armored up. All right. And this isn't, this is kind of a skillful use of coping mechanisms. This is a skillful use of triggers. And this is a way that we can kind of use that stuff to allow for ourselves to have those experiences, especially if, we've got a lot on our plate in our actual world. A lot of folks, they're parents. You're a parent, and so you can't always just lose your shit in front of your kid when you're going through the grieving process. So this creates an opportunity, instead of just stopping it, to make an opportunity to actually have those feelings, so your child doesn't have to carry the burden of those things, so your child doesn't have to, be unfortunately create a dynamic where they have to put mommy together or they have to put parent together after these things. I'm not saying you can't share your mourning process with your child. What I'm saying is that if you're sharing it with your child, it needs to be in a conscious way, not you just explode.
it's
right?
kind of, if you talk about unpacking, if you use the metaphor of like this is my suitcase, you've never opened it up, you should not, again, you should be really careful of who you're opening that up for the first time with, in front of. And I would say not your child.
Yeah,
It's got to be
100%. Yeah.
somewhat sorted through first.
Yeah.
So that, then you could open, because you'll be opening it up again and again and again, because these are very bottomless suitcases.
Yeah.
Mary Poppins bottomless carpet bags. And as you pull out, it's so good to have space of, trusted space or very private space to open these things up when you are, especially when you're first starting.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of times, it will make no sense, because again, it was often, it was packed hastily and
100%.
quickly.
So good. Yeah.
To get through it, and you threw it all in, and now you're carrying this really heavy baggage that is super disorganized.
Right.
yeah, and you need to honor
Yeah.
and give yourself credit for that you made it through it, you know, with your baggage. Like, good job, like
Yeah.
you survived it. That's
Yeah.
like, how you did it is great, and you know, I would not judge that. How you did it was great, because
That's
that's
right.
what was needed.
Yeah.
But as far as integration, calling these things home, you know, into our hearts, yeah, you got to open the bag up and start
Yeah.
sorting through it. Yeah.
So when you
And
make these periods where you open up, where you allow yourself to rage, it's not a bad idea to set a timer. Now, this all may sound very kind of inauthentic in
yeah,
relationship to your morning. This is one thing that people do respond with. Well, this sounds like prompted. This sounds, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. Like, this feels inauthentic. This feels prompted. This feels this is so weird to schedule a morning. And it is 100%. It's not how I would, if I had control of the world, it's not how I would do it at all. But it is, unfortunately, facing the world that we live in these days. It's the option that's in front of us. It's also a mature and kind of practical option and
adaptive.
pragmatic option. Say again.
Yeah, it's adaptive.
It's
To a
adaptive.
certain
Exactly
extent,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
we have to adapt to the reality of
Yeah.
our situation.
That's exactly right. So making this territory, if you spend 15 minutes to kind of sit in that stuff, you also would it be wise to kind of schedule some time after the timer goes off for you to quote unquote put yourself together if you need to. Okay, so going through, what we suggest is make a time for it, make a physical space for it, have your cues for it, whether that's just strictly memories or whether that's music or whether that's pictures or whether that's a physical activity, but make
Smell,
space for it. Say again.
a smell's
Oh,
huge.
smells are
Great,
important too, very
great
much so.
trigger.
Whatever stimuli you're going to use to trigger yourself to move into that space, use that stuff. And then make sure you like have a timer of like when you're going to finish that. I used to do half an hour increments. Okay, so I would have a timer that finished at like a 30-minute mark. And then I would allow myself for about 10 to 15 minutes afterwards to, like I said, put myself together. Because when you go into these things and when you have these things, you never know how like mellow they may be, or sweet they may be, or rageful they may be. And so we kind of want to make sure that we don't limit what our morning time is going to look like. And we kind of give some space for that. And we also give ourselves space to, like I said, put ourselves together. I did a number of these things while I was keeping up a work schedule. I did a number of these things in the face of caretaking for my mother and grandmother and stuff like that. I did this in the face of dealing with while I was a step parent for a period of time afterwards. I did these things in the face of these other responsibilities that I had made conscious choice to do. So we do have to kind of, it does sound maybe prescriptive, it does sound maybe a little bit rigid, but believe me, it's better than you exploding, because I've exploded.
Yeah.
All right. It's much better than exploding. And your triggers for that morning, it'll work. Okay. If you give space for it and if you can give yourself permission to have the feelings, have the emotions, those smells, those pictures, that music, those physical movements or conversations or memories, they will work for you and they will create an opportunity for you to have this in a more healthy way. Because, like I said, what we're wanting to do is avoid that explosion, avoid kind of creating more collateral damage and doing shitty behavior to people that we care about. And that's a super important thing. Time wise, like how often we should do it, in my opinion, what I usually suggest and what I found really helpful for me as well as for other people is consider it at least like once a month, if not 4 times a month. For me, my prescription for this is do it once a week. As much as you can, schedule that half an hour or that time period to mourn at least once a week to give yourself that opportunity to get into it and have a momentum and keep yourself kind of clean in relationship to that stuff. So these are some kind of guidelines about some of that stuff and boundaries of mourning. Is there anything you want to add with any of that stuff?
Yeah, it what made me think of as far as like what my own practice is.
Yeah.
As a female, my menstrual cycle and where I'm
Oh,
at in
beautiful.
that monthly cycle can absolutely either be like a really like I'm already deep within my system.
Yeah.
If it's the ovulation or the menstruation time, and I'm already like deep within like my gut and my physical body, and awareness is already down there. It's so much easier for me to get in touch with those deeper feelings because the physicality is deeper. Or yeah, seasonal, monthly is I'm gonna go super cheese and say moon cycle, though
Right on.
legit as
Yeah.
far as how the earth rotates and how the moon rotates. And I heard a while back that the full moon really is that symbolic place of full reflection of
Uh,
the time where if the moon, say, is the symbol for your psyche, that full moon where all the light of awareness, all the light of knowledge is shining on these dark parts, that the full moon is this time where it goes, this is a full time where you can, as we hide things in the dark, here's a monthly Mother Nature shows us
yeah.
at least once a month, there's a time when the darkness now is fully illuminated and we can look around and see, and we have some light, and then it cycles back down into maybe a little bit more darkness. But I also remember, in massage therapy, one of the first words we learned was homeostasis,
Right.
which I always say is just a fancy word for like your body in balance. And again, from the body worker's perspective and ITB, we work the full system, meaning mind, body, spirit, gross realm, subtle realm, causal realm, all at once. And so one is, so we don't devalue the body as far as is participating in our reality. It's the body's not, again, the body's not a tool. It's it is part of who we are. And so then to know that the body itself has this own wisdom and this own drive to healing, its own drive to homeostasis, that it helps me so much to remember that that even though there are parts of me that are story parts and script parts and traumatized psychology, there is also within me a part of an inner wisdom that recognizes how valuable balance is. And if I trust that inner wisdom and I allow my body to pull me into, then I am headed to, by default, balance, by default,
Yeah.
homeostasis. So then, yeah, the opposite of a pendulum swing of losing your shit on a barista at Starbucks is a lot less likely when,
Right.
again, you're creating space. And for me, again, I really cling to that there is an inner wisdom also at work here, that if I trust it and listen to it, and like Geoff touched on it, the listening with curiosity of what is going to come up here today, that not like I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes or my timer for 30 minutes and this is going to look like this.
Right.
This is going to look like, no, 15 minutes of go, I wonder what's going to happen here. I wonder what internal stuff is going to surface. Because again, the body seems to have, it's really its own kind of wisdom towards a wise unfolding to your healing.
Yep.
The body work that we do is fascial release, and in ITB we're taught to never lead but follow. And you can follow your own system. It's not just me following Geoff's system as I do body work on Geoff, but it's Sarah Cat following also, again, Sarah Cat's system.
Right.
That is go, I'm gonna release this first so I can release this second, so I can release this third. And again, my cognitive mind, again, there's so much mystery there. There's just no way I would know. I would know that. Mostly these days when I do my healings, what my practice is that I am empty. I go, I'm empty so that whatever needs to come through comes through versus agenda-less. There's so much value in that. There's so much value in agenda.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah, I love that example. We're closing up here on 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and, is there any like last statements you want to make here?
Thank you for joining us, Lex and Adam. I really appreciate it. YouTube people, in 20 years, you'll be like, look, this is Sarah Kat's first YouTube venture. And I'm probably going to be super embarrassed about how unrefined I am. But I honor this Sarah Kat in this day. Oh, yeah. And, you know, within ITB, we practice Mondo Zen meditation, which is a heart-centered meditation. And when you go through their ceremonies and rituals, they talk about how when you collect the Dharma, I believe the terminology is the Dharma, when you collect, how no matter how slightly, maybe insignificantly, you see a difference, there is a difference in every time we collect, and how miraculous these moments are. Unique and miraculous and very, very important to the healing of humanity. That every time we gather and we do this, and that's what I thought of today as I was going to log on, that this may be Geoff and I's 1000th conversation, but that does not devalue it, and it doesn't make it less miraculous.
That's right.
And it's miraculous that y'all are here and participating. Oh, and Adam chatted. Thank you for inviting me, of course.
Yeah, right on.
Namaste.
Right on. Right on. Very good. All right, anything else from anybody else? All right. Thanks once again. I'm going to echo a lot of things that Sarah mentioned. First and foremost, Sarah, thanks for joining us for this. This has been really brilliant. I'm glad we were able to chat this way, and I'm excited about future conversations here, and I'm really glad we were able to cover so much territory and get so much clarity. It was really awesome. Beautifully done. Thanks to the rest of you for showing up and participating. Remember, we're here every Sunday at noon Eastern time for ITB Sunday School. We'll have a new topic every time, and I'm sure we'll probably see Sarah again back in the next couple weeks for more stuff, if not months for more stuff. So
stop me.
Nothing, right? Yeah. So also remember, we do Mondo Monday. Sarah touched on Mondo Zen for a second there. We do Mondo Monday every Monday at 6 p.m. to 7:30. That's via Zoom. Again, you can participate and just listen. You don't have to be on video. You can just listen and participate as however you want. And we also do have more and more ITB options coming up online also with individual sessions. And we'll also keep an eye out for when Sarah brings out the grieving group as well. We'll keep you guys posted with that. So please look for all of our cool stuff on embodyingitb.org. And once again, this video will be posted. This Sunday school video will be posted to our YouTube channel, Integral Transformative Bodywork, probably within the next 24, 36 hours. So if you want to make contact with it again, as usual, always, please, please, please share the crap out of us if this is any kind of contribution or help for you. Please, please, please share it. There's, we don't have any guidelines as far as that's concerned. So just have fun and share it as much as you like. And also, any kind of donations for ITB, we deeply appreciate that as well. There's no mandatory thing, but we do make a request for that. To support the institution and support us going forward if you've benefited from this. So, and we have links for both of those. We have a Venmo account as well as a PayPal account, and there are links in our Facebook meeting stuff, meeting page. So there's that. So I think that's everything. So I'm gonna go ahead and close out and stop recording. And thank you all for, where the hell am I? Totally just got lost for a second, hold on. There it is. All right, so thank you all. Thanks for participating. Thanks, Sarah. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.